What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another 2024-2025 NBA look ahead. We are on to the Detroit Pistons, and as loyal listeners of the podcast know, that means we get to talk to Laz Jackson. He's an editor for Detroit Bad Boys. Go follow him on Twitter. The link is in the podcast and YouTube description at Laz Chance. That's at LazChaNCE. We get into everything Pistons. He's just one of the smartest minds out there. I always appreciate these annual conversations with him. And he does mention at the end that he might be doing at some point this year, especially because he's back in the Detroit market. Some more writing, maybe some more podcasting. He is, as anyone who's listened to this podcast knows, I've shouted him out previously when he would do his podcast and some of his solo stuff, like was just some of the best I ever heard, especially from that solo host perspective. So go follow him if you haven't already. Excited to maybe get some more content from him that's not just behind the scenes this coming year. That's all I got for you, though. If you're new around here, consider subscribing, get on YouTube, get in the comments, help the algorithm love us back. Spotify, Apple, the whole nine. Rock with us throughout the entire regular season. Grant and I have a ton of fun covering every single team. We think we do it quite well around these parts. So let's get to talking some Detroit Pistons with Laz Jackson. Laz, welcome back to the HardwoodKnocks podcast. I think we were talking. You might be in the double digits in terms of appearances at this point.
Oh, it hasn't been that many. Come on, dude.
Well, this is your 6th or 7th year of doing the Lookaheads with me because you did a Central Division one back when we broke it up that way, and I've had you on independent of Lookahead. So this could be like your 10th or something, but you've crossed the half-decade threshold on coming on this show.
Yeah, now I feel older than I already felt before, I suppose. But as always, it's great to be here. I appreciate being experienced enough that you reach out to me year after year. It's like I'm very much in my old man game, in the content game right now. So it's good to still know that I have the fastball, though.
I'm happy you answer because of how much of a mess to a lot of our regulars, no one's on. I'm not on Twitter as much. I promote the show. Sometimes I fire off jokes and I leave just because of what it's become. And so sometimes I have to wait a certain amount because there are people that I love having on, but they won't answer me for 1 or 2 weeks because they're just not on Twitter anymore. So I'm just ecstatic that you still answer me. These past 2 years, it's dicey where it's, are we going to get answers from are they still on Twitter?
No, I mean, I wish I could quit Twitter. That would probably be better for me, honestly, but I can't. So it's fine.
It'd probably be better for us all.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would think. The Detroit Pistons, though, how we feeling about just the totality of the offseason and what they did with their cap space? They fire Monty, they hire JB. How are you feeling about it? What does it say, do you think, about their overarching direction? I've said this about every team, but this is truly fascinating stuff from them. Fascinating pivot, I would call it.
So I feel like the direction has to be up, right? After you win 14 games, there's nowhere to go but up. After you fire all the decision makers involved with a 14-game season and hire new people, you feel like things have to go up, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the real answer to your question is how I feel overall is that the new president of basketball operations, Trajan Langdon, has done what you and I have been asking the Pistons to do for the last couple of years and finally started shifting the talent on the roster more towards the skill set of Cade Cunningham. There's no more double big lineups because Troy Weaver really likes centers. There's more spacing from the guards and the wings who you would think actually will play minutes with Cade this season. They hired a coach with experience, staggering 2 ball-dominant guards who can't play together, but are probably better apart. And, they also paid Cade $224 million, which the old regime would have done. But that's very much hey, we're new. We value you. We're sorry about the last couple of years. Here's $224
We're sorry about the last couple of years. I did find it. I always assumed it was a given, but in theory, it could have been the Cade extension, which was not something I planned to talk to you about because I just would have given it to him. That was my reaction to it. I don't think there was. I know some people were with him and Mobley. They're twisting themselves into pretzels, and I subscribe to what Brian Windhorst says. This is the fun max. This was the no-brainer offer. Is it I guess
my concern was more after the last 3 years, would he take it? Would he be the first guy who's no, I don't want $200 million. I want my freedom. And so getting that out of the way It's like, okay, like he's going to be here for the long term. Like, let's make this thing happen. Let's build the team around him.
It probably helped them in that regard that he's had like the lower body issues where let me just lock down this $250,000 basically, and then we can move on.
Yeah.
So yeah, what did you make though of the JB Bickerstaff hire specifically? Because I think in the Pistons situation or how we view, I know they're shifting towards Cade's skill set more. I think they would have been a team that after firing Monty, especially that they might have been a team that people pegged, oh, did they go off the beaten path and hire someone who doesn't have head coaching experience? But they go with this veteran in JB. So one, do you think that says anything specific, like going that direction with the hire? And two, do you have any sort of sense or insight into what you think their guiding principles, whether it's, stylistically, culturally, whatever, are going to be like under him?
So I do know that there was reports that after hiring a first time like team manager at Trajan Langdon has been like a GM but under David Griffin in New Orleans, and so he's running a team solely for the first time. They did not want to hire a coach who would be a head coach for the first time, and so that eliminated some potential candidates, Micah Nori, Sean Sweeney, both guys with Detroit experience, mind you.
I will say, just to interject, I just want Micah Nori to have a head coaching job ever since that John Krasinski piece at The Athletic, mapping out how he just works in random turns of phrase and words into his interviews, basically off of dares from his fellow assistant coaches or like players that are on the team. So Micah Nori is going to be a head coaching legend, and any team that didn't hire him missed out. That is my official stance.
Yeah, and they were two assistants under Dwayne Casey, like the year the Pistons made the playoffs with Blake, and so like there's a little bit of warm and fuzzies around those two guys in particular. And then obviously there was the connection of James Borrego being hired as the like lead offensive guy in New Orleans, and Trajan playing a part in that. And obviously none of that came to fruition. They went with JB. I felt fine with JB as the hire. Even all the names I just listed, none of those guys like really like made me feel like, oh, like this is going to be the guy that's really going to turn this team around. And the guy I would have preferred in Kenny Atkinson would also like fall under that same umbrella of like kind of a retread coach. But the thing I think that JB brings is boring competence. And after you win 14 games, boring competence is a massive leap in the right direction, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to frame it. And actually, I had this discussion I've had it a bunch of times with people in DMs, but we talked about on the show, where my biggest criticism of JB Bickerstaff is that sometimes it felt like in Cleveland, he'd play it too safe. And I think some of the injuries forced him to kind of get out of that a little bit. And we saw it towards the end of the season. I think when you look at the way Mobley was deployed, when you look at some of the lineups they would run in crunch time, even when they were healthy. And so I'm like wondering, does he now, I mean, like experience matters. And we've seen it think about Mike Brown in Sacramento, what he was viewed as until he went to the Golden State Warriors. And it's kind of like, did the experience with Cleveland, like, could we see more flexibility, experimentation, just some more creativity from JB Bickerstaff to where it's not just about the boring competence? It's like, oh, this is someone who brings a level of innovation now.
Yeah, I think that was needed for that Cleveland team last season, especially after the way that they lost to your Knicks in the playoffs 2 years ago. It's like, we need to show something. We need to show more versatility. But for this Pistons team and for all the young guys that are on this Pistons team, I think it's going to be really important to get the basics down. Yeah. And the thing I'm looking forward to seeing from the coaching staff is development. That was one thing. That was I think the biggest hit you could give Monty Williams, was that none of the young guys besides Cade seemed to be better than they were in their previous seasons under him. It's like, yes, maybe they were like the rotations were weird. I liked some of the stuff Monty did offensively. I think there are some fair. He obviously, like the Jaden Ivey situation was the most like high profile thing, but I had been warned by people I would talk to about Monty, like he would play favorites, and like we saw that in Phoenix, we saw that in Detroit. But honestly, like I think if any of the young guys had looked better, there's a chance like Monty Williams would still be here. But yeah, no, I think so. I think that development and improvement year over year, guys looking more confident and more experienced in March and April versus how they look in November, I think is the main thing that I'm going to be looking for JB in that staff.
We don't have to get into every move individually. I will say, though, shame on the rest of the NBA for letting Simone Fontecchio re-sign to Detroit for just like highway robbery of a deal. But do you think they got enough traction out of their cap space? Do you even not care about framing it in that way? Is it just like, oh, okay, like we got Cade and actual spacing now?
So it's interesting, right? Like, I think they did enough. Like, would I have liked to be the team that got 3 second-round picks to take Reggie Jackson on? Like, yeah, I would have liked that. Would I like to have not put Quentin Grimes in the Tim Hardaway Jr. trade? Like, yeah, that would have been nice. But there was some rumblings about Grimes being unhappy about his potential role and a lack of potential extension. And so, like, maybe that might be a thing where they just like, it's not worth the headache.
There was some of that in New York too, where he would complain about like complain might be too strong a word, but like not having the ball more. And it's like, well, you're on a team with Jalen Brunson. Like, what do you like? What do you want?
Like, I've seen you dribble. Like,
right, that too.
Yeah. So, but in getting vets that I think will play, and B, again, like fit around Cade Cunningham, I think they did pretty well using their cap space. The other thing is that these deals are here for a good time, not a long time, right? Tobias Harris is here for 2 years, and that's it. Malik Beasley's on a 1-year deal. THJ is an expiring deal. Like, I'm not the biggest Tim Hardaway Jr. fan in the world, but like he can play more than Joe Harris can, right? And like that was what we were talking about last offseason, was like how Joe Harris is like was going to impact this team. And so it's what they did was fine. It was between this and it's like, do they go after a Zach LaVine? Do they go after a Brandon Ingram? And I think while those avenues like would have been interesting to explore, I think that what we're seeing from the rest of the NBA regarding like those two guys in particular is like, okay, like maybe like this was the right call, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it too. The contracts are so short term that you can quibble, but there's nothing wholesale that it looks like you need to worry about here. Yeah. And this offseason was, I would also say, all teams were like, most of them, except with the exception of the Sixers, who pulled off a cap space masterclass. They're all kind of going through it and figuring out what was going. Like, I never would have guessed that Fontecchio was so cheap. I never would have guessed that Tobias Harris got so much guaranteed money in 2 years. I do think Caitlin Cooper calls it a soul tax, where like a situation becomes so toxic that a player's value just veers so far from his reality. And I think with Tobias Harris, it's fair to think that he'll just be better in Detroit than he was in Philly. But like even Malik Beasley only getting 1 guaranteed year at $6 million, what happened with Gary Trent Jr. and Tyus Jones?
Yeah.
I don't know. They can spin it how they want, that it was like kind of up to them. It's like, well, you only do this if you don't have like the other options. So I also wonder how much of that kind of just played into, did they act a little too early? Also, not, and even if you want to not want to say too early, but they're coming at it from the perspective of, well, we need like a guy like Tobias Harris to want to come to Detroit, or we don't want to miss out on like getting these like this deal for Tim Hardaway. I wouldn't have done the deal for Tim Hardaway Jr., or at least tried not to include Quentin Grimes, but like it does seem like, I don't even want to call it a misread, but it seems like maybe they were trying to figure out like, well, how soon do we act or let this cap space sit before we use it? And I really, the only move that I would look at and be like, oh, is the Tim Hardaway one. And it's just on the level of just like, who cares?
Yeah. Well, I think about like Utah. Like I listen to you guys. And so I've listened to you and Grant. Just
apologies.
Like, what is Utah doing? Right. And as it turns out, like they give Laurie the extension and they're not forced, but like they're giving like Kyle Filipowski like an extra like $3.5 million to like eat up their cap space because of the new CBA, where you need to hit the floor before the season starts. And so it's like, could there have been some better options out there? Like maybe, like, could they have waited and gotten Malik Beasley like on the Gary Trent Jr., where it's like just a minimum? Like maybe they do kind of still need a backup point guard. And so, but Tyus Jones very much, I think, thinks of himself as a starter. And with Cade, like that's not going to be in the cards. And so there were options out there. Like, would I have liked to be involved somehow in the DeMar DeRozan like sign and trade? Like, yeah, maybe. Like that would have been nice. But there wasn't enough. I don't think there were enough avenues for the Pistons to like get in on taking advantage of other teams like trying to duck the second apron and things. So it is what it is, and the team is better. Right. I think the team is more functional, and that's really what they were focused on this offseason.
So looking at this actual team and what may play out on the court in this forthcoming season, what is just the biggest storyline that you personally are going to be monitoring throughout the year?
Yeah. So this one's pretty obvious. it's Cade. How good does Cade look with the roster more suited to his talents, right? Because we've complained about it, and even through all the complaining, he was a lot better last year. He was a 24-5 and 7.5 guy. He shot 39 like and a half percent from three after the All-Star break. Like those are
backs for falling. You love to see it.
Those were very good numbers, and they coincided with just like adding Simone Fontecchio and not much else, and like getting rid of the Killian Hayeses and Isaiah Liverses of the team, who are just like not real NBA players, right? And so with less of a phone booth, with better talent around him, with other guys who might be able to make some shots around him, could he be like a 26-5-9 guy? Like that's kind of an all-star. Like Tyrese Maxey was an all-star last year, and he was a 26-4-6 guy, right? And so it's like, you know, if Cade can get to that level of production and the team can find some level of success on the court, some amount of wins, not lose 25 plus games in a row, it's like you have a narrative around like the team building something, Cade being a large part of that, and him being acknowledged kind of in the media, in the national media, and like by his peers as like a guy who's like willing, who's been able to do like the things for them.
Why do you think you just said something that made me think of it. Why do you think that there seems to be so much division over him? Is it because, okay, so we have this track record of injuries, and then last year everyone kind of latched on to the turnover issue, which got better. But like, if you weren't watching, and I guess this amounts to me being condescending, I hate playing if you weren't watching the Pistons card, but it seems like even with players who are more established, something might happen in the first like 10, 15 games, quarter of the season. And like, that's the storyline that defines the rest of their year, almost regardless of what is actually happening. What do you think makes him such a divisive figure in I guess it's would you build around this player discourse, basically?
Yeah, I think it's the fact that nothing about him is really like, he doesn't stand out in any like one area of the game, right? He's not he's a really good passer. He's made himself more of a shooter over the last season, but before that he was really inefficient and he turned the ball over a lot, didn't really get to the rim, never shot any free throws. And so again, like if you were only turning the Pistons on like during the 28 game losing streak, which I think was still like before Christmas, it's like, okay, like this team's going nowhere. This guy's like not able to elevate them. And so it's like, we can kind of write him off. But I think the team was so bad last year. There were just so many non-functional NBA players around him. And the skill set that he has was just like not, because he's not a guy who's going to go out and score 40. It was like, because he's a guy who wants to kind of play slower and kind of dissect defenses. I think that like he wasn't able to lead the team to wins, and people just kind of took that in a poor way, as a poor reflection of himself. Like you look at like Paulo Banchero was like equally as inefficient, but like slightly more productive, but his team was winning. And he got a lot of credit for that. He gets a lot of kudos for that. I think team success will lead to people viewing Cade in a more favorable light, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. What does the next frontier for him look like? You mentioned sort of the rim stuff, and I'd mentioned in the notes, it sometimes feel like he might have that extra gear, like let's flip the dial and get a little bit faster rather than, relying on, I don't know, hesitations or like bailing out too early on his drives. And he does still, maybe the lower body injuries have impacted it, but like you've seen him turn corners sometimes and like get by people. And if he did that more consistently, is that a spacing thing? Maybe now that it'll be better around him, he could get there, or is it just something else entirely that you're looking at for his development?
No, I'm looking at rim finishing, but I'm looking at him adding strength, right? The thing that really stood out to me last season was as he got stronger and as he got better, using his body to carve out space, you could really see that there were times where you were reminded like, oh yeah, he's 6'6", and like he can extension finish around bigs, or if he gets into the paint with no help, like he can finish over and around guys. It's still below the rim, right? But he can still do that. Like stylistically, he does still love those mid-range jumpers, and he's very good at them. but you do wish some of those were like paint touches and kickouts. I wish some of those were like 10-foot floaters instead of 15-foot like pump fake, pump fake, pump fake shot. But I do think that he will always kind of be who he is. He'll always be a change of pace operator. That's how he wants to play. But like, Dan, you watch Jalen Brunson, right? Like Jalen Brunson would just like pick people apart from like inside 12 feet. And like, as long as you get into the paint and pressure the defense, like you can figure stuff out from there. I think Cade like absolutely has the potential to do that. And that will be the thing I'm looking for him to do this season.
You mentioned someone with his size and Jalen Brunson's like footwork. That's a nasty basketball player.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is too, like as the roster gets better, like we talk about the spacing being something good for him, obviously, but with the spacing being better and with his teammates being able to hit more shots, he'll be able to distribute a lot more. And I think his distribution is something that doesn't get enough play because his teammates like don't hit enough shots, right? He's a guy.
I think he's a really, really good passer, and maybe some of it's like
really good passer.
Like he just the size and the ability to see things. And so I am very excited to see what he could do with what I assume will be better spacing. But that does kind of lead me into what I guess my biggest question for this team would be: how challenging is it to integrate, even whether it's like together or separately, just the primary kids on this roster, where the two things that stand out to me is, even if you don't think there are a ton of redundancies, the Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, Ron Holland, Jalen Duren, for like they don't feel particularly complimentary. And the other thing that I haven't seen it get a ton of run, but like one of these five, like Cade is there. So one of these four guys is this front office's guy. And like the other three kind of aren't. And so like how could that impact like the priorities or how these players are used? How challenging do you see like just the integration of all four of them together? So like whatever.
So I think like not all of the kids are going to make it, and not all of the kids are going to make it in Detroit. Like I just probability wise, like that's going to happen. So the thing I'm looking at, especially for this season, is Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey. And that's because they're going to be extension eligible this offseason. And so you need to figure out what you have in these guys. So A, you can figure out if you're going to pay them or not. And B, if you are going to pay them, you need to figure out how much, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren like aren't going to get the $200 million that we saw Cade get, but like, could they get smaller extensions, right? Could they get I think of it as the Norm Powell. It's not the Norm Powell anymore, but like the post rookie extension that's not a max, right? And so that's really important. And before the kids as a whole, it's really about who can play with Cade, right? And that answering that question, I think, is going to be paramount. Right now, I think it's really clear that like, Duren is the most clear pairing with Cade. We'll talk about Duren a little bit later. The idealized versions of Ron Holland and Ausar Thompson can absolutely like play off Cade. Both of those guys are like under 22, and it's going to take a while to get to those idealized versions. And so we'll see if those happens. But also importantly, you don't have to pay either one of those guys for like 2-3 years, right? And so that means Jaden Ivey's the big major question mark about A, like, can he play with Cade? And B, like, if he can't, what do you do with him? And if he can, what do you do with a guy like that, right?
What is the key to him playing, like the biggest key to Ivey playing with Cade, and even just your overall sentiments on him at this point? Because there are elements of his game where it feels like they all make sense next to Cade, where if he's going to hit set threes and he has that, catch and attack mode, or even just that fast twitch attack mode, they complement each other really well. But there's like all this other stuff he doesn't do, and everything he does well feels like it's inconsistent. So one, where are you at with Jaden Ivey? And two, like, what's the biggest key that if he's going to work aside from Cade, X needs to happen next season?
Yeah. If he's going to work alongside Cade, I think the major thing would have to be he would need to be a more consistent shooter. He was, by percentages, he was like an okay shooter, but there were some huge like peaks and valleys. There was 2 games against Sacramento and Portland on back-to-back nights where he shot like 13 of 14 from 3, and they won both of those games. And it was like, oh, like yeah, if he's going to do that, then like, yes, this can absolutely work. And then I think for there were whole months where he shot like sub 30% from three. And it's really hard to figure out. It's really hard to evaluate what he's going to be next to Cade if he can't be that type of consistent player. But like what his long-term future is for this team, I'm ultimately like really torn. I'm very guilty of focusing like on the things he doesn't do well. He doesn't defend very well at all. He turns the ball over way too often. And not only that, he turns the ball over in ways that are like guaranteed to piss a coach off. It's like live ball turnovers that instantly turn into layups where like even he's kind of like doing the surrender cobra like on the court, like, oh, I can't believe I just did that. And there were a lot of times where like I talked a little bit about the scenario with Monty and like not having a lot of confidence and having a lot of faith in Jaden. Like I got it at times. Like I understood why, like you can't operate like that. But I totally understood like why he was doing that. Also, like sneakily, Jaden doesn't really have an in-between game. It's like threes or the rim or nothing. And like that is like Morey ball. That's how you like idealize like want to play. But when teams know you like won't operate from the mid-range or you can't, it makes you very easy to defend. And so like that's one area I think he needs to show some improvement in. But
yeah, I think you could make for some players too, like Morey ball makes a ton more sense for someone who's being deployed as an accessory, not someone necessarily who's running your offense. You want them to have more layers and levels to where they're scoring from.
right.
So is he this, we'll get into the rotation a little bit more later, but like, do you view him as like, they're going to start him next to Cade to begin the year?
I think you have to. The roster's also kind of weird where I've lost faith in Marcus Sasser. And so without a true backup point guard, it does feel like Jaden Ivey is just going to be your backup point guard. Again, JB Bickerstaff has a lot of experience doing the hard stagger where one of those guys is always on the floor. But in the long term, I think where I'm at is it's going to be best for both sides if there's a change of scenery. And that's not because I don't think Jaden isn't a talented player, because I absolutely do. I just think he's going to be best with this is like we've talked about this for years, like literal years, Dan. Like he's going to be best with the ball in his hands, and it's going to be really tough to do that when at his best he's probably not going to be as good as Cade Cunningham is with the ball in his hands. And like with that in mind, like I even think there's like a really great destination out there for him, like Brooklyn. Brooklyn absolutely needs a guy who can make stuff happen with the ball in their hands and is prepared to be bad enough to let him figure out like how to do that at an elite, at a high level for like an entire season and have him like be the quote unquote guy. Like Ivy and Cam Thomas, that's not a good team. That's a very fun team. I'll watch that team. So yeah, it was
bring back the Cam Johnson to Detroit rumors too by throwing this into the ether.
DFS would be a nice addition on the wing too. But yeah, I think like it's tough because like this is always going to kind of happen, right? Like I talked about this after he was drafted, so he's going to be best with the ball in his hands, and they have Cade. And so I do think a change of scenery would be best for both sides. Will it actually happen? Like, no. And do I hope they trade him? Like, I honestly don't know. If he figures some stuff out as backup point guard, cuts down on the turnovers, shows more consistent shooting, like that's absolutely a very, very valuable player. And that's something as somebody I think like JB could take advantage of offensively. But will it happen? Like, I don't know.
Is there, and the other thing too, so I was going to ask if the hard stagger maybe increases the likelihood that it would pan out, but then you have difficult decisions to make with your most important lineups to where Jaden Ivey probably still isn't in them. And just what does that look like long term? And the other thing is, if you're going to hard stagger them, my assumption would be then he in turn is spending a lot of time next to Ausar Thompson and or Ron Holland.
Yep.
And that's going to create a whole bunch of spacing concerns unless Jaden Ivey just turns into not just a great set shooter, but like this off the dribble shooter. And so there is a complex nature there, but I also do. Jaden Ivey is one of those guys where when he's on, like it's just tantalizing as hell.
And because of that, you hope that I think if they are going to separate, or if the decision is made, that you would want Jaden to really thrive in that like staggered bench role up until like January. and then have like a Giddy situation where some team looks at him and it's like, yeah, we would like that guy to have a bigger role. We'd like that guy to come in and like run things for us. We think he could be successful doing it. And you could get something of value back for him, because it would really be crushing to trade a number 5 overall pick for like very little in return, simply because like he was the wrong selection, right? Not that not for nothing, but I know that he was not the preferred selection of the Pistons like in that draft. It was Keegan Murray, but like obviously Keegan went before 5, so it kind of just like it was what it was. But yeah, the whole Jaden Ivey thing is really complicated and really complex, and I hope he figures it out, whether that's in Detroit or someplace else. Like you said, like when he's on, he's a tantalizing player to watch.
I am in love with Ausar Thompson, the defense, and I was wrong about. We were on this podcast last year because I went back and looked at my notes. I talked about how I believed in the jumper.
We all did.
I won't say that I'm a disbeliever now, but I'm feeling less confident about it than I did. But the passing stood out to me as well. And like there was smart stuff from the standstill, but when he was going downhill, and there's something I was working on months ago, like his assist percentage on drives was just absolutely bonkers, like relative to the rest of the league at large. Let's start with the positive. What impressed you or stood out or surprised you the most about him?
Yeah, definitely the way in which he was able to attack advantage situations, right? There was a lot of kind of tinkering to figure out like what the best role for Ausar was. You saw them kind of stick him in the corner a little bit and just kind of like tell him to figure it out. And he made hay with like baseline cuts and in transition. As the season kind of went on, they started involving him more in actions. They had him slip a bunch of screens. You'd throw him a pocket pass at 16 feet. He would make a dribble, and then like he would either finish or like make a good decision with the ball. And that's something I think that will key, like that's a skill in an area I think in which he will continue to make improvements and continue to be able to contribute this season. And like weirdly, he had a really good jumper like inside the arc. There were times where he'd get like cut off on a drive and he'd do this turnaround where he would just jump like 12 feet in the air, shoot like this little 10-foot turnaround, and it felt like it would go in at like an 80% rate. And it was just like translating whatever confidence he's got in that shot to the 3-pointer, I think would be paramount for him. And for what it's worth, like he shot like an eye-bleeding 15% from 3 prior to the All-Star break. After the All-Star break, and he had some injuries. He got whacked in the face, I think, prior to the All-Star break. So after the All-Star break
situation too, that was
yeah,
that sucked. I hope he's fine, by the way. I don't know that. Have you seen, heard anything about that?
All reports are that he's going to be fine for training camp. He was in Chicago for the draft lottery, and like obviously you can't fly with the blood clots, and so like him being not in Michigan tells you that like he's probably able to fly, and they're probably like not worried about it long term. So like that is a good situation, obviously.
I have a follow-up question about that. Do you think that these players want to go to the lottery, or is it like a form of punishment? Like, hey, you shot below 25% from 3. You're gonna have to go represent us at this lottery. I never know if the active players want to be there. Most of them aren't like, oh, am I here because they're drafting my replacement? But like, it's just like, do they want to be at these things? Like,
I think he was just chilling. I think Trajan represented them in the lottery, so I think he was just there. Like,
oh, okay,
yeah, but yeah, it is a very weird moment when you have like the guy who was just drafted being like, I'm excited to be here, but also like, am I getting another guy that's going to be in competition with me? I don't know how.
Turns out they did. So
yeah.
What? And is the jumper the swing skill for him? Is there anything else that's just kind of like that's low hanging fruit, but it's like it's a big deal.
The jumper and the handle. His handle's really weird. He dribbles and shoots very methodically, very regimented, very much like someone who's been coached to dribble and shoot in a certain way. And then after the All-Star break, the shot went in at 27%, which is still bad, but he looked a lot more contract
after shooting like 28% on threes. So hey,
But he looked a lot more confident and fluid taking them. But previously, like for the YouTube audience, in the first half of the season, you see him like catch, elbow, up, like over, and you could see like him like walking through the motions of like how to take
Buffering
it.
internet is what it looked
Yes,
like.
very much so. And as the season went on, like that process got quicker and smoother. And the results, there were better results. Still not good results, but better results. Obviously, both the Thompson twins have like legendary work ethic. I bet he's in the gym like shooting like right now, and so I feel confident that he'll get to a baseline level of competency with the jumper. It's just going to be a longer process than we initially thought.
Someone as smart as yourself saying that in turn just makes me feel so much better about how I felt about him a year ago, and now I will that those feelings are undergoing a renaissance. Is there?
Well, no, and the other thing is like JB has experience like leveraging off-ball shooters in offense, right? Like Isaac Okoro playing two bigs with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen when like the 2 years ago when Evan Mobley like wouldn't shoot any threes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel also confident in that in a bench role, they'll be able to figure out ways to get him involved offensively to the point where, yes, the jumper is still be an issue, but he'll still be able to contribute on that end.
That's what I was just about to ask too. Is there sort of like they definitely have the time, but do they sort of have the bandwidth to explore more Ausar Thompson on the ball? Just because I know his handle can be a little erratic, but he is such a good passer. And as you mentioned, there is kind of a vacuum at Stagger, Jaden Ivey, and Cade Cunningham, but there is still kind of a vacuum for secondary playmaking. And if he's gonna come off the bench, it feels like a natural point to be like, oh, maybe we trust Ron Holland's handle more, but like I think Ausar Thompson's the better passer. So like, do they have the bet? Would you expect them to explore that or no, not really?
That's definitely a like later in the season thing. I would definitely explore that studio space with the first part of the season being like, hey, how competitive are we? Like again, like what are we going to do with Jaden Ivey? Can we win some in-season tournament games? Like, can we portray ourselves as more competent than we've been in the past? And then the second half of the season, that's the Will Hardy special. Everybody gets to experiment, explore some studio space. That would be, I think, be a good time for Ausar to get some more on-ball reps in which I think he would probably do fine, right? He can slither under screens. If he gets even like a little bit of advantage, he's not like Jaden Ivey fast, but like guys can't stay in front of him. And so I absolutely think there's potential there.
And you think there's even, and I think you might have mentioned this before, but is there even more potential to like, okay, well then we'll use them at the beginning or the meat and potatoes of the season, however they're viewing it. We're going to use them as the screener more. Then do you think that's something they're really going to focus on this year?
I think that's the best way to leverage, like we've seen with like Draymond, right? Like that's the best way to get guys involved who can't shoot is to just have them like screen and create space for your other shooters on the floor. And again, like we talked about his ability to pass off drives. Like Ausar is a very high IQ player. And so if he's leveraged in that way, like I have no doubt he'll be able to like make hay out of it.
So Jalen Duren confused the hell out of me last year, and I almost giggled out loud because I forgot where we were in the outlines I've been bouncing around, and your first response to what I said with that. What are we going to see like less? I phrase it as, is he going to get a shorter leash, a more streamlined role on the offensive end? Like what is going to happen with Jalen Duren this season?
So the way you put inside baseball, the way you put it in the outline was like, was he given too much agency to try shit on offense? And what I responded was that it wasn't given to him. He took it though. Was like, and from his perspective, I completely understand it because like at the beginning of the season, it was very much like he was playing his role. And then like as the losing streak kind of went on, you could see him being like, well, shit, like nobody else can do anything. Like, let me have a go at it. And it was very frustrating to watch because it was just like head scratching decision wise, but I understood it from a mentality perspective. Like you can spin it as like, what is he doing? Or you can spin it as like, he's trying to do anything he can to win basketball games. And for the sake of argument, I'm going to spin it as like, he was trying to do everything he could to win basketball games. And the other thing is he very clearly like cares about his offensive game. You see the level of refinement in his post moves. He hit like the Wizards and he hits the bonus with like just some insane footwork down low. He had some really nice finishes over Chet Holmgren in a 2020 game. A 2020 game in which he told the media, "Don't forget my 6 assists as well." It just like shows you what kind of prioritization he places on his offense. And so like he's a very, very talented player. He also like made real strides as a free throw shooter last year. He went from 61% in his rookie year to 79% in his sophomore year. That's a big jump, and it was a meaningful jump too. He looked a lot more comfortable at the line. There were late game scenarios in which you're like, oh, like I feel okay with like him taking these free throws, which was a far cry from where he was his rookie year. And so I do think he's very offensively talented, very offensively gifted. I mentioned the partnership with Cade. We saw some of that like the USA Select team scrimmages, right? They have a lot of chemistry and pick and rolls. He's got like between the legs handoffs to Cade to get in kind of like a stampede cut. And so like they have a lot of chemistry, and that's really cool. The thing with Jalen Duren is though he was so bad on defense last season. And the generous interpretation of that is after the ankle injury, which I believe was his like 3rd ankle injury in 2 years, he like basically stopped trying to block shots because he was worried about landing. He kept landing on people, and it was like that kept messing up his ankle. Like one of the beat guys talked about this, and I couldn't remember if it was in like a report or a podcast. And so I was combing through podcasts, like trying to get this nugget for you, Dan, but I couldn't find it. But like this is definitely, it was definitely a thing where like after he came back from the ankle injury, he like stopped trying to block shots. I believe like Ausar had more blocks than him on this season, which is like, yay, Ausar, but like also like that's not.
Given the time that Ausar, honestly, if Ausar never misses all that time, I'm probably like, it's Ausar. That's okay. But yeah, given the games played thing, yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah. And like it didn't help him that they were playing a lot of drop. They were playing a lot of no middle, and like nobody could really keep the ball in front. And so like he's constantly having to react and overreact, and he's 20 and he's still figuring stuff out. But he also very much like the level of detail you see in his offensive game, you don't see in his defensive game. And that's something that's definitely like concerning for me. But he was willing to play a more defined and refined offensive role at the beginning of the season. And so I think if there's team success, if the team can win without him doing like fake keeper dribble handoffs and attacking the rim, if the team can win without him, you know, trying to take rebounds coast to coast like he did, which was cool, but like when it didn't work, it was like, what are you doing? And it's like I think he can succeed in that role and have that role be like clearly defined for him. And like the team really needs him, right? Like Stu is your backup big right now. Like unless you really like Paul Reed, like I like what I've seen from Paul Reed, but like, do I think Paul Reed is going to start for this team? Like not really. And so like Jalen Duren's the de facto like big for this team. And again, we talked about the extensions. Like if he's going to be that guy, if he's going to be the big man on this team, like how much is that guy worth, especially if he doesn't make strides defensively, right? Like how much is a mainly offense only like big man like worth in today's NBA?
Right. And do you think that, like, I think we've seen at least the potential of him on defense, but you mentioned the struggle of playing with people who really can't keep the ball in front. Simone Fontecchio might be a little underrated there, but the 2 players on this roster who are best equipped to do that, I would say, are Ron Holland and Ausar Thompson. And he can't really play with both of them. So is this team built to optimize? Because I do think, like, in terms of if he's able to rotate over to the rim and make like those sort of basic reads, like he can get and has, I think I've seen games at least where it's like, oh, he's doing that really well. But is this team built to, I don't want to use the word insulate to imply that he's always going to be a weakness, but are they built to optimize him defensively yet?
I think the answer to that is no, especially if like one of like Jaden Ivey or Malik Beasley or Tim Hardaway Jr. is in the starting lineup. But I think they're better equipped than they were last season. It's interesting, right? Because like defensively, his best pairing was with Isaiah Stewart. And Stu was a guy who could keep the ball in front and like he could just like collect rebounds. And I think that was a priority for him. Obviously, like he's not going to be playing with Ausar and he's not going to be playing a lot with Stu. I think that's a look that they'll give, but he's probably not going to be doing it a lot. And so will like your Simone Fontecchios and your Tobias Harrises like be able to contribute defensively in a way that matters for him? And I think the answer is yes, just because they're vets who like know where they're supposed to be positionally. And so it won't be a matter of it'll be a matter of ability and not knowledge, right? You won't have guys being like where am I supposed to be? And that's why they're not in front of the ball versus in the regular season, you're not playing you're not everyone you face in the regular season is an NBA player, but you won't always be facing like Philly or
Right.
Boston, right? Like there will be times in which like Tobias Harris and Simone Fontecchio are the wings are like perfectly adequate, perfectly cromulent defense for what the Pistons need.
What did you think of the Ron Holland pick, and what are kind of your early impressions of his game, his fit, the whole nine there?
Oh man, I love Ron Holland. I love Ron Holland.
I love
I
to
was
hear
I
it.
was
He had, I'm not sure if you were familiar. I know who Jonathan Wasserman is,
mhm.
but he did have Ron Holland as the number one prospect on his big board. If that imbues you with any sort of even more hopefulness than you already have.
Yeah, so I was confused that more people didn't have him higher, right? My thing was always when I watched Holland and I watched the Ignite, it's like this is a very young, very disorganized team. And he still managed to be productive but inefficient, but he was 18, right? Like having that level of production, I think was outstanding for a young guy. And but the elevator pitch of like the Jalen Brown starter kit, like yeah, like I love that archetype of player. Like sign me up anyway. Holland had a really good summer league, in my opinion. Again, he was productive but inefficient. There were bad aspects. He did kind of put his head down and drive into three people and get stripped a lot, and that wasn't great. But the way he was able to play in transition, I think the decision making improved as summer league went along, which was good to see. And then he was very impressive on defense, not in a like, oh, he's like got a bunch of blocks and steals, or like he's a SAR, like erasing Grady Dick's existence in summer league like 2 years ago. But he's just really, really solid and really, really huge for a wing, right? He's 6'8", and you can
Yeah, he's
see guys
massive.
like figure like, oh wait, this guy's way too big for me to like drive into. And so the Holland can do a little bit of everything right now. He can score, he can defend. He's a better shooter than Ausar. He looked confident in the shot. I think the shot will improve. He had a couple like really nice like mid-range jumpers that is like, oh, like once he builds a base, like the jumper will be better. But I think key for Ron this season is that unlike Ausar Thompson and Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren, they don't need Ron to play right away. It'd be nice if he does, but he can focus a little bit more on development, or he can focus a little bit more on the things that will get him on the floor like in his rookie year, which will be like defense and not like ball handling and creativity, right? And so I think limiting, not, we talked a little bit about this a little bit with Duren, but like having him play more of a role early in his career, I think will be beneficial for Ron. And it'll enable the coaching staff can tell him like, hey, if you do these things, you'll earn minutes, as opposed to just be given, as opposed to the minutes just being like given to him. That also is like a little bit of a double-edged sword. I don't think there's any value in like sending him down to the cruise if he's not going to play, for example, because again, like, yeah, the situation might be a little bit more organized, but like he proved he's a 20 point per game guy in the G League. And it's like, will he be best served by just like being a 20 point per game guy for the cruise? Like probably not. And so it's probably better for him to just like stay with the big team and focus on the things he needs to improve on to actually play NBA basketball. But like in year 3, like this guy's gonna pop. Like I can just see it already. And so I'm super high on Ron Holland.
Where are you at with, if you watched enough of his, like there are a lot of people that seem to be confident that his jumper is going to be fine. And so where
Yeah.
do you kind of land on that end of the spectrum?
He's got a very obvious mechanical tweak that I think will be made. Of course. Oh, didn't even mention Fred Vinson, the legendary shooting coach brought into Detroit. Huge aspect of what I think the Pistons are looking to do with Ausar and Ron in particular. And so I think like, yes, I think he will be a perfectly fine NBA spot shooter. He looks really fluid. He looks already, and Ausar is not like a good baseline, But it's just like I got so used to Ausar looking so uncomfortable, like taking
Mhm.
jumpers. Ron looks way more comfortable. The jumpers just don't go in.
In a big departure from where the Pistons are at, they currently have fewer than 1 trillion bigs on their depth chart. Are they, it seems like, just my zoomed out view, and we did see it at points last year, that they are going to lean into more of the spacier looks overall. And so does that mean even more Isaiah Stewart at the 5? Is there a chance we even see Bobby Clintman get some minutes? Does Paul Reed up his 3-point volume? He dabbled in it a little bit with Philly. Is that like the look it feels like they're going to try and go for, especially if, look, if you want Thompson and Holland to have these roles, and even Jaden Ivey, when you have so many, even if you don't want to call them liabilities because that's too strong of a word, let's say question marks when it comes to perimeter shooting and spacing, is that a look that you expect them to lean into even more, let's say, independent of the Jalen Duren minutes?
Yeah, I definitely think the way the bigs are set up on the roster right now, uh, Duren's going to be the starter, Stewart's going to be the backup, and Paul Reed is there for part injury insurance. Quietly, both Duren and Stu have like played like 50 to 60-ish games per year. And but I am intrigued by both Stu and Reed's ability to stretch the floor as quote unquote like small fives. Neither one of those guys is like tiny, but they're both like not like 7 feet either. And so I do think that playing a quote unquote stretch five like allows you to get away with playing an Ausar or a Ron or both in like bench lineups in a way that like playing Duren and Ron or like wouldn't let you like get away with as much. Um, I think it would be really funny to see like Paul Reed and Stu on the floor at the same time. It was like two stretch bigs, kind of sort of. Reed is a really funky player, and all of my exposure to him has been like only when he plays well. So I'm very curious to see how he plays on a very consistent basis. And then Bobby Clintman. Bobby Clintman's
It is
probably
Bobby. I kept too many people calling him Bobby, including myself, apparently. Bobby's cooler, so I fave it.
Bobby is cooler. He's probably going to play with the Crews.
That's upsetting.
He I he was fun in summer league. He also shot like 9 for 19 inside the arc. And so if like the only thing he's going to contribute is floor spacing, like, there are better options for the team than that. But he's a very interesting player, and I hope he gets the chance to work out some of those when he gets stronger and a little bit better with the ball in his hands. Like that's going to be a really interesting player, and he'll get the chance to do that at the G League level.
Marcus Sasser may have seduced me last year just by being someone who could hit threes. And it seems like you think I might have been over seduced by him relative to their situation, because I look at the way that the rotation is set up, and unless you think you're going to give more ball handling or playmaking responsibilities to an Ausar Thompson or want to try out Ron Holland in that capacity, it looked like it might have been set up for him to have a little bit of an expanded role. But you seem to disagree on that front.
Yeah, I'm kind of out on Sasser. From what we saw last season and in summer league, he is not a point guard. He's just point guard sized. And so like as an off ball guy who can like we can run a secondary pick and roll and like make some open shots. Like I think he has value, but he's no longer a guy whose development I would really be trying to prioritize, especially given like the regime that drafted him is no longer in place and he's already 24 years old, right? Um, he Jade, I need to figure out what I have in Jaden Ivey, and in order to do that, like Marcus Sasser, like kind of superfluous, but interesting, but superfluous.
So is that like, does that become sort of a, if he's not that guy, okay, you have Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, but like, what's the theory of like, who's the third playmaker then on this team? Is it like the third best passer after them is Ausar Thompson,
Uh,
right? Who am I missing?
yeah, no, it'd be a SAR. It'd be a SAR in my mind. And that would be a guy who'd like run some bench lineups, or what I think is more likely is they probably bring in some outside help down
Yeah,
the
I was gonna,
line.
because the theory of why they had Monty Morris at one point, like it made, I know the injuries and stuff, like that made sense to me in terms of,
Mhm.
I've become over the past few years a big believer in, I don't know if the word is optimizing or streamlining development for everyone, where it's okay, it's cool to see Ausar Thompson as example and all these on-ball reps, but if like the half court ecosystem isn't set up for him to succeed, or you're asking him to do too much in a less than ideal environment. I don't know how much service you're doing him. And you point this out also with the G League stuff is also, if you put players in roles in different situations that they're not going to have when the minutes matter or the most important lineups, how much of a benefit is that to you or them anyway? And so I'm like, now that I look at this team and you don't think that, which I think is perfectly fair, by the way. Like I said, I think I was overseduced by, Marcus Sasser shot like almost league average from three, basically, like on this Pistons team.
Yeah.
It feels like there might be value in like, well, is there just a veteran that can soak up some minutes? It's not, we're giving up a ton of assets to get them, but it makes the job easier on everyone else and also fills what seems like is clearly a void on this roster.
Yeah, they do have an open roster spot, and they have two big voids in like backup veteran organizer. I think in terms of like organization, right? Like getting guys where they need to be and making sure that you're like running your half court offense in a way that like actually makes sense. And I've talked a little bit about the bigs. Reed and Stewart are undersized, and we talked about Jalen Duren's defensive deficiencies. So I would like another rim protector. So either filling that roster spot with like either one of those archetypes is, I think, going to be what they need to do to flesh out the roster. But yeah, I agree with you that like if Sasser's not in there for the long term, and he's also like not really an organizer or a streamliner, they need that archetype. Absolutely.
So are you ready to enter the cookie cutter portion of the podcast, Mr.
Let's do it.
Mr. Lazarus Jackson? Okay, so what does the top 10 rotation look like for this team?
So what I would do is I would probably start Malik Beasley, a guy we haven't talked about that much, but a guy who
was, by the way, I don't know, maybe I was watching the wrong Bucks games. He catches a lot of shit. They were asking him to do too much defensively. He was a lot better defensively when he was switching on specifically like bigger players. I think Detroit Pistons fans end up being pleasantly surprised with how he does there. That, or I only watched the games, which we all know I don't watch games. I don't watch them, but I must have only seen the games in which he was doing good things or not terrible things on that end. So I've just seen him catch a lot where it's like, oh, like Malik Beasley sucks on defense. It's like, well, it's not his fault. Like the Bucks wanted him to be like that type of advantage creator defender a lot of the time last year.
He's like, he was guarding Tyrese Maxey a lot of the time. Like what do you want from him, man? Like
there's one game against the Bulls where he just gave like Nikola Vucevic the business on 3 consecutive possessions defensively. And it was like, not that that was the trend, but it was like he was holding up fairly well in those situations in the game that I saw. So I don't know how much he's going to find himself in those scenarios with Detroit, but just some Malik Beasley love, especially because he cost fucking nothing. 1 year and $6 million is just bonkers to me.
Yeah. So I would put him in the starting lineup. I would start Cade, Malik Beasley, Simone Fontecchio, Tobias Harris, and Jalen Duren. And then I would have Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Isaiah Stewart be your like 9-man rotation. And my rule, like after Monty Williams, like no more 10-man rotations, no more full bench lineups. We're done with that. My rule would be like one of Cade and Ivey is always on the floor, and one of Tobias and Simone is always on the floor. Hard staggers for both of those guys. Tobias and Simone's skill sets open up, I think. Like we talked a lot about like what like the shooting and the spacing that they need. Is like if you play one of those guys at the 3 or the 4, that enables you to play like an Ausar, obviously, and then you can obviously play them together because they both can space the floor.
Obviously, this will be matchup dependent, but what would your crunch time lineup crutch be? Is it just the starting unit that you outlaid?
Yeah, I think it would just be the starting lineup, unless like Jaden Ivey is having a really amazing game offensively, or Ausar Thompson is just like completely cut off somebody's water. Like that, the starting lineup is the direction I would head in. And against bigger opponents, against like a Cleveland or a or even like a Lakers, I would maybe you'd see a crunch time lineup where Stu and Duren do play together, just because again, like that was one of their best defensive pairings like early in the season, and I think that's a pairing that works.
There any offbeat, funky lineups that you would like to see them roll out at any point next season?
The starting lineup with Stewart instead of Duren, I think would be like it's kind of 5 out if you squint a little bit. I think that would be really interesting. And then there's a defense and chaos lineup I've got was Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, Ron Holland, Paul Reed, and Isaiah Stewart.
Oh,
It's just
God.
like shooting. Like, who cares about shooting? We're just gonna make shit happen.
Wow. I don't know what the offense on. I feel like my eyes are already bleeding thinking about what the offense would look like.
We're getting turnovers. We're turning people over and getting out in transition. That's the plan with that lineup.
I do like the idea of just seeing what it looks like defensively, of having Ron Holland and Ausar Thompson just on the floor together and seeing what type of like chaos they can interject.
That's in my mind. That's the long-term vision. And so, like, yeah, you would want to get some looks at like how that looks sometime during the season.
I want to see Cade, Fontecchio, Ausar, Ron Holland, and let's put Bobby in the middle. I know I couldn't pronounce his name correctly, but the idea of kind of stretching the floor and like some of the stuff he can do in the open floor, I don't know what that team or lineup looks like defensively, but it's like, and I can talk myself into it because like, oh, there's like enough youth. And like Simone Fontecchio is the only one that's over the age of 25 in that unit. It's like, doesn't like, why don't I just roll it out just to try it? Maybe that's something we could see like post trade deadline.
I mean, I doubt we'll see something that little, but like you've always tended towards the like ultra small lineups when we do the funky lineups. So I'm totally not surprised that that's where your mind is at.
I think Ausar had enough stocks last year that that this counts as small ball with some like gritty size to it. He plays like a player who's a lot bigger. But you are right. I'm glad my brand stays strong after all these years of leaning into the. Although by my standards, this might be a pretty big lineup if you really think about it.
That's
like I'm not asking you to play Marcus Sasser at the 5.
You definitely had like an Isaiah Livers at 4 lineup like a couple years ago where I was like, ooh, we're tiny.
You were gutted when we didn't talk about Isaiah Livers until the end of the podcast last year.
Man,
And now
Isaiah Livers was so disappointing last year. He just could not make a shot. And then we found out that like he had like rotator cuff or he had like a shoulder issue, which is probably the reason why he couldn't make a shot. And then Troy Weaver promptly rescued him, and he's in Washington right now. So
their current win total class is set at 25.5. Would you take the over or the under? And how many wins do you actually see them potentially getting next year?
So I'm not sponsored by BetMGM. This podcast is not sponsored by BetMGM, but that is my sportsbook app of choice. And I have a wager on the Pistons at over 24.5. I would go to 25.5. I would go over on that wager as well. 27.5 is where I start to get like squirrely, because then I think this team will be better, right? I think it's pretty clear that the roster is better. The situation around Cade Cunningham is better. The coaching will probably be, I think, a little bit more streamlined and better. But to double your win total, even from a season from hell, I think is like a hard expectation to set on any team. And so I think like 28, 29 wins is where I'd be like, ooh, like I don't think this team has got that in them. So 26, 27 wins is about, I think, where I put this team, which would be like, again, like a 13 win improvement is not nothing, right?
No.
But but when you start from such a low baseline, like that kind of gets you in trouble.
Does it has to make it, maybe the word's not enjoyable, but there has to be more hopefulness involved here, because yeah, you're working off a low baseline, but there's like, that has to be last year's rock bottom from like that experience perspective, where it's, even if they only win, let's say they hit the under on this, but it's like, oh, they still won like 23 games, 24 games. Like that's 10 more. It's 11 more than last year. Like that just makes the experience a little bit more enjoyable. I would think the other, I guess it's a twofold thing, is in the East, what would benefit them winning more games is like the Nets and the Wizards are coming out the gate. They don't give a fuck. Like like that's going to happen. And I think that's the right move for them. I want to be clear. And then there's like some other teams where Charlotte's always injured. I think they're better if they're healthy, but will they be healthy? And Toronto and Chicago and Atlanta are all kind of caught. It's like one of those teams, the floor is going to be ripped out from underneath them, and it's Chicago. So we don't even really need to talk about the other two. So I think that benefits them, where the bottom of the East, there's going to be more wins available. But I would ask you, like, is that something this team is interested in making progress in the form of winning games? I think when you see so many veterans that they sign, my guess would be yes. But like, is there also a chance like, oh, it's the trade deadline, it's, we're still clearly not in playing territory. Like, we'll call it more like late season shenanigans. Like, are those potentially in play if this roster's healthy. I want to make it clear, not if injuries kind of force their hand.
No, I definitely think you'll see some like April shenanigans with this roster. I think this team is better suited to win games early in the season. I also think like the Malik Beasley signing, that's definitely like a hey, like contender. Would you like some Malik Beasley at the trade deadline for like an early second round pick? I bet you would, right? Like that. There's a setup for that. So
I'd probably
I'll say
rather
is
have
that like
Malik Beasley than an early second round pick if I'm the Pistons. I'm just like pearl clutching all the shooting for this roster. I'm not gonna lie.
I like Malik Beasley. I think he will contribute. I also think that like you could find a different Malik Beasley, like not super difficultly.
Apparently, shooters don't get paid anymore, so you'll find them next year in the open market, I guess.
Fewer people got paid, just like in general. Teams are terrified of the second apron. But the thing I'll say is that as a young team who needs things to look forward to early in the season before the squirreliness begins to happen, what I would want to see from the Pistons is to treat the, what is it now? It's the NBA Cup. I was going to say in-season tournament. It's not the in-season tournament anymore, but to treat the NBA Cup games like very serious games that you need to win. Okay. Making like, I don't expect them to make it to like the second level of the bracket or whatever, but they just got like absolutely destroyed in all their in-season tournament games because teams were like, oh, like we need to kind of get up for this one. And having that not be the case, being competitive like in those games in particular and aiming at those games as something like, hey, like we know that they want this, like we should want this too. And having that be something you work towards early in the season is something I would like to see them prioritize.
Yeah, I also want a team like the Pistons. I know the Pacers were kind of like they burst on the national scene, but we knew the Pacers weren't going to suck last year. I want a team that's like very early on or like going through this more gradual process, like to go off. It's like, give me the Wizards of the Pistons winning the, and can we call it something else like the NBA Goblet or Chalice? Like we need to come up with a better name for what the midseason tournament like title is called.
Yeah, the NBA Cup is now sponsored by Emirates. And when I first saw that, I was like, wait, they're playing in Dubai in like November? Like, why? Like, oh. Like, no, just sponsored, but that's definitely coming.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think of it like that. You're probably right though. Okay, so is there anyone that I didn't ask you about related to this team you think we need to discuss before I let you skedaddle?
We didn't really discuss the vets in only as far as to say that like, hey, we think they will make Cade and the rest of the team better and introduce a baseline competence. But like Tobias Harris doesn't suck, man. Like he's sucked in his role and he's sucked in like high profile, high leverage situations. There won't be any of that in Detroit. Like he'll just be good. He'll just be like a fine like 19-6. And like the Pistons honestly really could use another like 19-6 that like didn't take 50 million shots to like get to that point. So I think Tobias has a chance to like reestablish some goodwill for himself in the larger NBA community this season. And I want to see that happen for him.
Yeah, I think he was also, even when he was playing well, like there was a point in Philly where it was like he was just quietly like a perfect 3-and-D weapon for them. Like he was really defending his butt off. But I also think that even during that stretch, everybody looked at his contract number and like we're so often guilty of we make players whose contracts we don't necessarily like or think of positive value. Like we just assume that player sucks. And it's like it becomes tough to separate. We do it with young players too. I mean, I hope I don't do it specifically too much, but like think about all the players who were super intriguing. Like remember Tyler Hero before he signs his extension, and it's like, oh no, whoa, Tyler Hero's awful. And so it's like there's that tendency, like once these players start to make more, if you're paying the third option, what some people believe to be too much money. Chris Middleton's kind of going through it right now in Milwaukee, I think. So I would agree with you. I'm curious to see how good he is, but like I said, to reference Caitlin Cooper again, like the Philly feels like Tobias Harris in Philly feels like a perfect soul tax situation.
Yeah. And on your point about like guys becoming their contract, I'll be really curious to see how like if Isaiah Hartenstein like doesn't fix OKC's like rebounding thing. It's like we're paying $30 million for this guy and he's like not doing the only thing we need him to do. It's like I can see that situation like turning ugly like very quickly.
Yeah, and see, like, and sometimes I frame it as, so I look at the Hartenstein situation specifically. I'm like, I feel like they paid a "we're not going to play you as much as you want" tax on this. Whereas, like, you're probably not going to close because they view Chet Holmgren as a center in most cases, and like, I don't think he's going to start. I haven't really dug into the like what's going to happen with the Thunder next season yet. But you're absolutely right. Like, I'm sure people are already doing it. It's like, why is Isaiah Hartenstein getting all this money? And it was also, I think he might have contributed to, and even seeing what happened with Jonas Valanciunas after that hit job on Jared Allen and The Athletic by anonymous sources related to the Cavaliers. I was shocked he signed an extension, but I think he also kind of looked at it and was like, all right, people will still get caught. Like, Jared Allen at $30 million a year feels like a lot. It's not in relation to the cap. And to be honest, like, he probably thought like maybe he would get more in 2 years, but you're looking kind of the lay of the land for non-superstars right now. It's like, no, I better take this money right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially non-offensive like creators centers. It's like, take whatever money you can get. Poor like Mitchell Robinson and like Robert Williams the third. Like, I have no idea what like those guys' like next contracts are going to look like, right?
I would pay, if he was healthy, I'd probably pay Robert Williams III an ungodly amount of money, which is good that I'm not running an NBA team then. Laz, this was so great as always. I always appreciate your time. I appreciate your insight even more. Are you able just to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic stuff that you want me to say Xing about?
No,
No,
don't
I don't want to say it either.
Well, and Dan, I will say I always appreciate you having me on. I feel very valued by your continued appraisal of my expertise. That makes me feel good. People can follow me on Twitter, not X, on Twitter, at Last Chance. That's at LAZCHANCE. Now that I just did a move, so I'm back in Michigan now, and so I'm hopeful like I'll buy a house eventually, and then I'll be really settled in, and then I'll start writing at Detroit Bad Boys again. But I will say the podcast duo of Blake Silverman and Wes Davenport have done a really great job with their podcast, The Pin Down, for us over at Detroit Bad Boys. So check out that podcast. And then, yeah, I did the I was like guest host for like a month on James Edwards III's Patreon podcast, the Detroit Players Podcast. That's like $3 a month. Check that out as well. You get great insight. But yeah, you'll see me a little bit of everywhere during the season, and that's the way I like it.
I love it. Love your tweets. Miss your the Pin Down is very good. I'll second that. That's the most like frequent Pistons podcast I listen to. I miss your podcasting, and I've actually shouted you out a bunch of times as when I'm doing solo episodes, which I hate doing. Our audience doesn't seem to mind them though, which is, I mean, that's a good thing.
You've done a good job with them. Again, like I listen,
them.
like you've done a good job with them.
I despise them. When you were doing your Pistons podcast, and a lot of it was solo, you and Keith Parrish are like two of the best solo podcasters I've ever listened to, or in his case, watched. And so kudos to you for being able to do that. And I miss hearing your voice on podcasts though. So hopefully that can be remedied at some point in the near future. Thank you so much once again. Take care. I'll talk to you soon, Laz.